But we do have some time here for questions, and we really, really want to have a conversation with people here. So we've got a mic here that's got to run around because we've got C-SPAN and others here. We have to record it. So are there questions? Raise your hands, and we'll move the mic to you. Here's the first one right here.
Could you guys comment on the gender gap and why Hillary has had such a problem this year with male voters?
Okay, everyone here?
Well, I guess you have to decide how you want to. You say, why has she had so much success among women, right? You can decide how you want to view that question, right?
Or why is she having problems with male voters? Like, for instance, Wisconsin last night, Obama came out with 63% of male voters as opposed to her 34%. Trends like that, why is the problem for Hillary?
To her appeal. I mean, when you think about it, kind of goes back to where her appeal has been all along in this contest was supposed to be at a very specific group of voters. Now, what we had seen over the course until really last night is that both of those candidates fit very cleanly into these different silos, and none of them had been able to break out of that. And so we had Barack Obama with independent voters, with African American voters, and yes, with men doing better. But he was never able to sort of grab onto the places where she was able to hold on to. And when 60% in some of these states, 57, 58% of the electorate is women, and you're winning decisively among that, I don't know if that's a problem that you're not winning decisively among men, because then you still win the election, right? You still win that contest. Now, the problem for Hillary Clinton that came up yesterday was the fact that he was able to break into her base among women. He was able to break in, most especially on these economic, on voters who, on economic issues, had been tilting toward Hillary Clinton. So voters making $50,000 a year or less, voters who were members of a union. I mean, those were, going back to Joe's point, but that sort of traditional Democratic base vote, she was doing very well there. And when we talk about who's turning out, now, we don't know for sure why we're doubling these numbers. We know that, yes, independents are turning out more so in Democratic primaries than they are in Republican primaries. But we've also made this assumption that Obama's ability, it's actually based almost exclusively on Barack Obama's ability to bring new people into the process, as opposed to saying, well, maybe 57 or 58 or 62% of the electorate's women because Hillary Clinton's actually bringing new women and new people into the process. So I think that had been, so again, it's a way of looking at perspective. So the bigger problem, if you're Hillary Clinton, is as you're going down through Texas and Ohio. Joe's point is a very good one about just the format of Texas. You go to Ohio, a place structurally similar in many ways to Wisconsin in terms of what the base vote is. But if she's losing it as strongly as she did in a place like Wisconsin, holding on to Ohio, I think she can still win in a place like Ohio. But the margin is no longer a guarantee.
Yeah, I would say, look, when in Iowa, where people started, women in particular, started to see her more as carrying Washington's water than their water, she didn't win women. And so when she's a change candidate, when she can really successfully push herself as a change candidate, she tends to win women really big. When, for whatever reasons, forces, going negative on Obama, I think, too harshly, so therefore betraying herself as the old politics, not change but status quo, and so doing more damage to herself by the way she conducts her campaign, women walk away. She's not carrying our water, she's not changed, she's just the old stuff. And so I think you see this fluctuation with women where she can win them with 57%, or she can lose them like she did last night, 51-49. But she does, in a weird way, she's doing this to herself. It's sort of what I was saying earlier. I really do not understand this, the reason they set themselves up as the status quo. I mean, I understand what you're saying about they had no choice, but I also think she could have said, look, right at the fore, I'm going to do this differently. I'm not going to take lobbyists. I mean, there's certain things she could have done. They could, they could have just said, hey, I'm different. We're going to do this a different way, and I'm going to come with a different perspective. And there's no woman out there who hears my voice every woman knows that there's no way we're the status quo. And I cannot, I mean, just simple things. I just don't get. But that's for another day.
Another question? How about on the end here?
Nobody's yet mentioned Congress. I know 8 days ago there were a couple of incumbents that were knocked off in Maryland, and I can never remember that happening before when there wasn't an indictment or a major scandal. How does the kind of top-down versus bottom-up model that you've been talking about, Joe, and some of the other people, does that translate into Congress this year or in some of the senatorial and governor's races, do you think?
I think that's why you're seeing these incumbents defeated in primaries. It goes back to Amy. 2006 was change, and 2008 is going to be change. And if you're an incumbent, you can get changed out in your primary just as easily as you can get changed out in the general election. And I think this urge within, I don't, just not the Democratic Party, but the electorate for really doing something different, for really changing the way we do politics, which is what Obama's tapped into, and which, in a weird, I agree, how McCain taps into that is going to be fascinating to watch. and I want to say one thing about this internet and new stuff, because I can tell you that the inspiration for me to really look at what we did in the Dean campaign was the 2000 McCain campaign. I remember watching these guys build this amazing internet thing in which they got 40,000 people to join and raised a couple $1 million after Iowa. And I just thought that was the coolest thing I ever saw. And I was like, if I ever get a chance, we're going to try to build it better. And we did. And now to come full circle and have it coming right back at them, and they're dead in the water on this stuff. It's just amazing to me. But to answer your question, yeah, I think you're going to see. I think you're going to see more viable primaries because you can now. Somebody can challenge a sort of establishment state senator and have thousands of people around the country send $25 and actually buck up a campaign that the DCCC or the Republican Congressional Campaign Committee doesn't look kindly on. And you start to see a little of that in 2006, by the way. And I think you're going to see it become more powerful 2008 and beyond. Those committees are going to have a little bit less power than they used to have in making these decisions.
And this feels a lot like '92, right, where we saw, which by the way was the trivia question, the only other state that saw 2 incumbents lose primaries, 1992 in Arkansas. Very good, Blanche, which brought Blanche Lambert to Congress. But the question, though, is not simply that. I don't think voters are going to go out and oust incumbents for incumbent's sake. But if you're an incumbent who has, consciously or not, gone against the will of the district, i.e. there are examples in which you no longer fit that district. And so I think for Al Wynn, for Gilchrist, some of it is catching up with. It's ironic, we had so little turnover after the 2002 redistricting. But now a lot of that is coming back to bite some of these incumbents, right? That they assumed that the redistricting didn't matter to them because they won in 2004 and they carried it in 2006. But now that is the sort of thing that I think hurt Wynn, and I also think was problematic for Gilchrist as well. So for any candidate who seems either out of step or out of touch, however that's portrayed, whether it's on issues, ideology, or style, they're going to be in trouble. But that does not mean that every incumbent suddenly has a big, bullseye on their back.
Can I just ask you, actually, prerogative of the moderator, just to talk a little bit broader on to what extent you see broader disruption through congressional races or the Senate? I mean, do you see a kind of outside the presidential election, some really big changes on the horizon here that we can expect or start watching for in 2008?
Well, yeah, I mean, I think it's pretty
shift?
clear that Democrats are going to hold both and increase their lead. It's just always been a question of how big that's going to be. And the irony, of course, too, is that incumbents, especially on the House side, are becoming almost an afterthought because of the huge number of open seats. I mean, 15% of the Republican caucus is not coming back. That's a number we haven't seen since the 60s or the late 50s. So this is really unprecedented. And even with the Democrats money advantage, which is also unprecedented, there's still not enough cash to go after open seats and incumbents and protect your own. So I think in some ways there are incumbents who could survive this election simply because they got lucky in that they were further down on the queue. The question in my mind is, how does this set up for 2010? All right, and that we know this, if Democrats win the White House, they're going to expand their lead in the Senate. I don't think enough that we're going to be talking about cloture-proof, things like that. I think 2 to 4 seats is more reasonable to talk about. But you got a big lead in the House, you got a big lead you got a majority, or maybe a working majority, whatever that means now, in the Senate, and a Democratic White House. We know what this means traditionally. Bad news for the party 2 years later, right? That's always been bad. 2 years later to have to come and defend that. And if you're Republicans and you're thinking about how do we get the House back, how do we get the Senate back, 2010 is a much better opportunity. So what does matter, we know in the House it doesn't matter if you have a 1-seat majority or 200-seat majority, you still control the agenda. But it does matter how many seats Democrats add, because it can increase the cushion that they have going into 2010, so that if it is a bad election, if we are still in a bad economy, as has happened with almost every first-term president, they have stumbles, that there's some give there. So that's what's going to be, I think, the important thing to look is to see how big that can be.
Pete, can I just say one thing about the 2010? I know we're getting ahead of ourselves a little bit, but
we're already bored with 2008.
No, but I think it's important because I think for Democrats, there hasn't been an awful lot of governing so far since 2006, and it's been a lot of politics. And I think that there are going to be 3 issues that I think will dominate the first 2 years of the next president, and whether they're Democrat or Republican, which is what to do about the economy and to make sure more people are prospering in a global age. Second is healthcare, at least if it's a Democratic president, will absorb an enormous amount of time. And third is dealing with Iraq. Because whether you want to keep the troops in or out, just managing this massive investment we've made there, given how important it is to the American people, and frankly how important it is for our image around the world and for traditional geopolitical concerns, I think there are going to be 3 overarching things that if the Democrats don't put points on the board, by the summer of 2010, there could be, as much as there's breeze blowing more the Democratic way than we've seen in my entire adult lifetime, and breeze blowing in the Republican face, it's going to be about governing stupid, and starting in January 2009, and there are big, daunting, difficult things that we're going to have to do very quickly to show that there is actual change and that it isn't a hollow promise. And I think, so it's why I think this is, this city may have a year where there's going to be a lot of people seeing their kids and playing golf and doing all the things they do, but next year it's going to be an enormously consequential time in our history. And that's not even including things like climate change, immigration, make your list of other things that is on that list of things that we got to do. So it is, the next few years I think are going to be a time of enormous consequence for the country, and certainly for the balance of power of the 2 parties.
Let's take a few more questions. I know there's a lot of hands over here. How about in the middle there? Yeah? Can we get a run over there?
I share your excitement and your optimism. And, I was even excited in 2004 because I saw a lot of indicators that were positive back then. And this is sort of a fun question. How can this be screwed up? How can we screw this one up? Let's put it that way.
That's
a fun question. Just for fun.
Those are old politics. That's an old politics question. We don't screw up anymore. Joe, that's for you.
Well, I mean, the easy answer to that is for exactly what Simon said, is for the superdelegates to somehow put down whatever, and I'm talking about regardless of which way the pledge delegates are going, and I would still not today write the Clintons out of this, but I'm saying if, however that goes, the superdelegates sit down and decide no, we're going to go with somebody else, I think that would be a pretty good way to screw it up, because I think the damage done either way, in terms of people who worked pretty hard for this and had it crushed by insiders, would be pretty devastating. Devastating to how this could go down in November. That said, it still is McCain on the other side, and he's still going to carry George Bush's bag. So maybe even a damaged broken party could compete, but it would make it pretty difficult, I think.
Other thoughts? Do you want to offer your?
Well,
You're good.
yeah.
All good. Oh, no. Okay, you got in the back. Switch, and then we'll go back. And then we're just a few more questions, and I know you got to run back.
My question is, does bottom-up politics lead to bottom-up governing necessarily? And, you know, the fact that Hillary Clinton is running a top-down campaign, does that mean, should she pull it out, that we would have, you know, a top-down administration? I guess as excited as I am about what Obama has accomplished so far, I feel a little bit like we're crapping on the Clintons, who are folks who are important figures in the progressive renewal in this country, and, you know, the founders of the New Democrat movement, in fact. So, you know, could there be a top-down campaign that leads to as progressive an administration as we would all hope and expect?
Great question. Who wants to take it?
I think Simon.
I
think it's indicative of the campaign they've run. I don't think you're going to. I think it'd be hard to see what they would think bottom-up government looked like. I mean, compared to what Obama or somebody ran a bottom-up campaign. By the way, I don't think bottom-up means you know, bottom-up governing. I think it is a good thing that whoever would be trying to put their health care plan through would hopefully have millions of active Americans out there talking to their neighbors about why it should pass, so they're not being bought down by independent expenditure television commercials telling them why it's so bad and why they should stand against it. So bottom-up governing is not, if it's actively getting people to participate in the government and more transparency for what's going on, is a good thing. And I would hope that whoever gets in, whatever party gets in, that they would take the step to understand that the technologies out there right now in which the American people actually can participate in forging a new direction for the country. And I think it takes the people at the top understanding that you got to let go a little to let that happen. And that's tough. I mean, I'm not putting anybody down. That's how I was trained. I was trained top down working for Ted Kennedy in 1979. Everybody out there was trained that way. The first, you know, kids from the Dean or Wes Clark campaign that are managing House races now and maybe 8 years from now running a presidential campaign will be the first, hopefully, bottom-up trained people, and they'll have their, you know, and they'll instantly and instinctively get it. It's not down. I'm not down on anybody. It's just a very difficult thing. In the Dean campaign, I knew I had to let go, and I kept grabbing the controls. You know, I mean, because your instinct is to do how you were taught. And I knew I shouldn't, and it'd be like a stove. I'd like to grab it for, and I'd have to let go. So it's not their fault. It's just how the process and the system tends to drag you in that direction. And I think you're just seeing that break loose a little bit, and there's this new way. And I think, you know, anybody who didn't see the new way, I mean, Amy said, like, may have been impossible for them to see that there was this different way at the beginning of this. I think that's true, but man, did you watch 2004 or not? You know, I mean, there could have been, you'd think there'd be a little bit of a, let's open our heads a little bit more. But so I just think it's a different cultural thing that's going to be tough for them.
Sure. I just quick point on that is that the line we talk about is that when I got into politics in the 80s, you know, a presidential campaign in your mind's eye, right, was a 30-second tarmac hit. I mean, a tarmac hit, a 30-second spot, and 200 kids in the headquarters going to work every day. And I know that because I was one of those 200 kids, right, in the '92 campaign. But now when you think of a presidential campaign, you've got to think about 10 million people going to work every day as partners in the fight and not donors to the cause. It's a completely different model of politics. It's a citizen-led model, and frankly, it's a much better model. It is a significantly better model because it's tapping into the passions of the American people about their own concerns and anxiety and hopes and fears about their future and their kids' future. And it allows you to have much more money, much more neighbor-to-neighbor kind of talk, both through traditional targeted neighbor-to-neighbor as well as virtual neighbor-to-neighbor. And it puts the American people, I'd rather have 10 million people on my team than 200 kids in a headquarters, right? And that's the model, what we're talking about. And the key thing here, and this is where I think a lot of the Washington pundits have just simply fundamentally not understood, that the reason why Democrats have so much more money now is not because of the intensity gap. It's because we've adopted a completely different model of politics. And it is a better and more modern model than what we practiced in the 20th century. The Republican Party still views the internet as a democratic thing, right? That is a problem. A TV is not Democrat or Republican, it's a tool. The second thing is, on the Clinton thing, is that, look, the struggle, Bill Clinton reoriented our policies in the 1990s around the middle class. The great success of the New Democrats and Clinton government is that he reoriented the Democratic Party and put it squarely on the side of the struggling middle class, the forgotten middle class. But he did not reorient our politics around the middle class, right? Is that Bill Clinton would give a speech about the struggling middle class during the day, and then that night he would go to a fundraiser with people giving unlimited amounts of money to the DNC. And the people who were part of that, including me, were aware of how weird this was, right? So I think Clinton reformed our policies in the 1990s as progressives, but he didn't reform the politics. And what's happening now is we're completing the circle, right? That our politics now are also being reformed squarely behind the middle class, which I think is why the Democrats are becoming much more authentic champions of the middle class, because their policies and their politics are aligned, right? And this is why when you see statistics like, do you believe the Republicans are more for corporations or for average people, and it's 70-5, right? Or that you see 90% of the voters in Wisconsin last night believing the economy isn't working for them. You know, there is a dramatic shift that's happening in the American people today about their understanding of whether or not there are people in Washington and their leaders are actually looking out for them. And that's why this reorientation of Democratic politics around people and not Washington is a game-changing event that is still, I think, not very well understood by the Democrats. By Washington, who could have believed that the Democratic presidential candidates using $2,300 contributions could have outraised the Republican Party by 2 to 1, by over $100 million in 2007, or that Barack Obama raised almost as much money in January of this year as John McCain raised all of last year, right? These are kind of unimaginable things, and you hear commentators say, well, there's an intensity gap. Oh, give me a break, right? I mean, this is because the Democrats have embraced a superior model of organization of politics that is allowing them to raise money and involve superior numbers of people. And this will be a determinative thing, I think, in the fall elections in 2008. And I just want to say again, I got to go, and I know we got to wrap up, Pete. So, yeah. But I want to say, Andres, welcome. I just want to say it again. Welcome to our amazing team. I turn it to Pete to wrap up.
Well, Simon is. I think we're going to have to wrap it up here. But let me just say, Simon, nice wrap on that. It does bring up one thing: is that we have been noticing that a lot of these tools, a lot of these new approaches, have really hit politics. But to your point, I think we're starting to see how it will start moving into government in this next the next 5 to 10 years. We're going to see much more of how this bottom-up leveraging of everybody moves into government. And along those lines, I do want to end up here saying, if you like this gathering here, we have, again, 3 weeks from today in the Hilton, a day-long event on this transformation of more the agenda, the policy agenda, essentially, that's moving us into the 21st century. Terrific outside speakers, moving the big ideas that are happening in technology, economics, world power shifts, and moving that into how that's going to really affect politics in the next decade ahead. And we'd love to have you there. Go to ndn.org or newpolitics.net as well to get any of the video of this and also any of the more information on our event. So thank you very much.